The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small martial arts dojo in Arizona. It was a typical Saturday. The kind where parents dropped off their kids for lessons and volunteers prepared for the weekly charity event. But this Saturday would be anything but typical. Steven Seagal had arrived early, keeping a low profile as he always preferred. Dressed in black jeans and a plain dark shirt, his signature ponytail pulled back, he looked like any other martial arts instructor. No cameras, no entourage, no fanfare. Just a man who'd promised an old friend he'd stop by to support a charity event for at-risk youth. He moved quietly through the dojo, observing the young students as they practiced their forms. One boy, no more than 10 years old, struggled with his stance. Steven approached him with a gentle smile, kneeling down to adjust the child's posture. His hands guided the boy's feet into position, his voice soft and encouraging. "There you go. Feel that balance. That's your foundation." The boy's face lit up with understanding, and he bowed respectfully. Steven returned the gesture, then rose to his feet, content to remain in the background. That's when Richard Hale walked in. Hale was a local businessman, the type whose expensive watch announced his presence before his voice did. He strode through the door with his teenage son trailing behind, clearly expecting the red carpet treatment. His eyes scanned the room, looking for someone important, someone worthy of his time. When his gaze landed on Steven, quietly helping the young boy, he saw only what he wanted to see: another aging instructor, probably volunteering for free. "They let anyone teach here now." "Huh," Hale muttered, loud enough for several people to hear. Steven didn't look up. He simply continued working with the child, patient and focused. Hale's son tugged at his father's sleeve, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, come on. Let's just..." But Richard Hale wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, seriously, what is this, a retirement home for has-been action stars?" He chuckled at his own joke, glancing around for validation. A few parents shifted uncomfortably. The children stopped practicing. The room grew quiet. Steven slowly straightened, his expression calm and unreadable. He met Hale's eyes but said nothing. The businessman smirked, mistaking silence for weakness. What Steven did next left the entire room speechless, and this man regretting every word. Steven stood perfectly still, his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady. Years of discipline had taught him that silence often spoke louder than words. He watched Richard Hale with the same calm intensity he'd used in countless situations throughout his life. Situations far more dangerous than this. But Hale interpreted the silence differently. He saw it as submission, as fear, as proof that he'd already won this confrontation before it even began. "Chat got your tongue, old man." Hale pressed, his voice growing louder, more theatrical. He was performing now, feeding off the attention of the room. "Or are you just trying to remember your lines from one of those straight to DVD movies?" A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd, though most people looked away, embarrassed for everyone involved. Steven's friend, Marcus Chen, the dojo owner, quickly made his way across the mat. His face was tight with worry. He'd invited Steven here as a favor, to inspire the kids, to bring some positive energy to the charity event. This was turning into a nightmare. "Mr. Hale," Marcus said, his voice diplomatic but firm, "perhaps you don't realize who you're speaking to. This is Steven Seagal. He's a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido, and he's graciously volunteered his time today to..." "Oh, I know exactly who he is," Hale interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "I know who he was anyway. A has-been actor who pretends to be some kind of tough guy in movies where everything's choreographed and fake." He turned to address the parents and children directly. "You want your kids learning from someone real, not some Hollywood phony who probably can't even touch his toes anymore." The insult hung in the air like poison. Steven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his eyes remained steady. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, and carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn." The simplicity of the statement cut through Hale's bluster like a blade. For a moment, the businessman seemed genuinely taken aback, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Instead, he doubled down, his face reddening. "Earn it." Hale laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "You want to talk about earning respect? I built a business from nothing. I employ over 200 people. I donate to this community. What have you done lately besides cashing royalty checks from movies nobody watches anymore?" Steven's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He took one step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just present. You're standing in a room full of children, Steven said softly, and you're teaching them that money equals respect. That success gives you the right to belittle others. Is that really the lesson you want your son to learn? Hale's son, standing near the entrance, looked absolutely mortified. His head was down, his shoulders hunched, wishing he could disappear into the floor. But Richard Hale wasn't capable of backing down. Not in front of an audience. Not when his ego was on the line. You know what? Hale's voice rose to a near shout. You talk a big game about respect and discipline. But I think it's all talk. I think underneath all that Hollywood mystique, you're just another fraud. He gestured broadly at the dojo. So prove it then, old man. Show everyone here what you've got. Or are you too scared? The challenge echoed through the silent room. Parents exchanged shocked glances. Children stared wide-eyed. Marcus looked like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. Steven looked at the children first, his gaze moving from one young face to another. He saw their confusion, their discomfort, their curiosity about how this would end. Then he looked back at Hale, studying him with the same intensity a chess master studies a board. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Steven nodded slowly. All right, he said quietly. I'll show you. The room collectively held its breath, but Steven didn't move toward Hale aggressively. He didn't raise his fists or assume a fighting stance. Instead, he gestured calmly toward the center of the training mat. But we do this my way, Steven continued. No aggression, no violence. Just a simple demonstration of what real martial arts is about. Hale's smirk returned. He'd gotten what he wanted, a spectacle, a chance to humiliate this aging action star in front of everyone. He had no idea what was about to happen. Have you ever witnessed someone's arrogance lead them into a situation they couldn't handle? Drop your thoughts below. Richard Hale strutted toward the center of the mat with the confidence of a man who'd never truly been tested. He rolled up his sleeves, loosened his shoulders, and cracked his knuckles like he was preparing for a bar fight. The expensive fabric of his designer shirt stretched across his chest as he puffed himself up, playing to his imagined audience. Dad, please don't do this, his son called out from the doorway, his voice cracking with desperation and embarrassment. Hale waved him off without even looking back. Relax, son. This'll only take a minute. Time someone showed these people what real strength looks like. Steven stepped onto the mat with the grace of someone who'd walked this path 10,000 times before. There was no showboating, no posturing, no wasted movement. He simply stood there, centered and calm, as if he were about to lead a meditation session rather than accept a challenge. But before he addressed Hale, Steven turned to face the children gathered around the edges of the mat. Their eyes were wide with anticipation, some excited, some anxious, all of them completely absorbed in what was unfolding. Before we begin, Steven said, his voice clear and purposeful, I want you all to understand something important. He paused, making eye contact with several of the young students. Martial arts isn't about proving you're tough. It's not about beating someone up or showing off. It's about discipline, control, and most importantly, knowing when not to fight. A few of the older kids nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. The younger ones listened intently, hanging on every syllable. Real strength, Steven continued, isn't measured by how hard you can hit. It's measured by how well you can control yourself, especially when someone is trying to make you lose that control. He turned back to Hale, who was impatiently shifting his weight from foot to foot. So here's what we're going to do. Steven announced, his tone even and unbothered. No strikes, no punches, no kicks, just a simple test. He settled into a natural stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands relaxed at his sides. Try to move me. Use all your strength if you want. Just push-pull, or try to make me lose my balance. Hale's face twisted into a confused smirk. That's it. You want me to just push you? That's it. Steven confirmed. This is ridiculous. Hale muttered, but he was already moving forward, eager to end this humiliation and prove his point. He planted his feet, placed both hands on Steven's shoulders, and shoved with considerable force. Steven didn't budge, not even slightly. It was as if Hale had tried to push a tree that had been rooted in that spot for centuries. Steven's stance, his balance, the precise distribution of his weight, the decades of Aikido training, all of it combined to create an immovable center. Hale blinked in surprise, then tried again, this time putting his shoulder into it. Nothing. A few giggles erupted from the children. Parents glanced at each other with raised eyebrows. Several had already pulled out their phones, recording what was quickly becoming the most unexpected moment of the day. "Come on, you're not even trying." Hale growled, his face beginning to flush red. "I'm not resisting you." Steven replied calmly, "I'm just standing here. You're the one using force." Hale gritted his teeth and tried a different approach. He grabbed Steven's arm and attempted to pull him off balance. Then he tried pushing from the side, then from behind. Each attempt met with the same result. Steven remained perfectly still, perfectly balanced, perfectly in control. The children were no longer giggling. They were watching in awe. After nearly a full minute of failed attempts, Hale stepped back, breathing heavily, his expensive shirt now damp with sweat. His face had gone from red to crimson, a mixture of exertion and profound embarrassment. "You're doing some kind of trick," he panted, pointing an accusatory finger at Steven. "No trick," Steven said quietly. "Just proper technique, proper foundation. This is what happens when you build your strength from the inside out, not from ego." The room had gone completely silent except for Hale's labored breathing. Steven remained in his stance, unmoved and unshaken, a living demonstration of everything he'd just taught the children about true strength. Marcus, the dojo owner, stood off to the side with his arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This wasn't how he'd expected the afternoon to go, but it was turning into the most powerful lesson these kids might ever receive. Hale stood there, defeated without a single strike being thrown, his arrogance deflated like a punctured balloon. But Steven wasn't finished yet. Steven remained perfectly still for a moment longer, allowing the lesson to sink in. Then, with the fluid grace of a master, he shifted his weight and extended his hand toward Richard Hale, not in aggression, but in invitation. "Let me show you something," Steven said softly. Hale, still catching his breath and nursing his wounded pride, hesitated. His instinct was to refuse, to storm out and save whatever dignity he had left. But something in Steven's tone, a genuine offer rather than mockery, made him pause. "Come here." Steven gestured to a spot directly in front of him. "Try one more time. But this time really commit. Put everything you have into it." Hale's jaw clenched. Against his better judgment, he stepped forward again, planting his feet firmly. He wasn't about to be humiliated twice without giving it everything he had. "Ready?" Steven asked. Hale nodded, then lunged forward with both hands, driving all his weight and strength into Steven's chest. This time Steven moved, but not the way Hale expected. With a subtle shift of his hips and a gentle circular motion of his arms, Steven redirected Hale's energy completely. It wasn't a block, wasn't a counter, it was pure Aikido, the art of using an opponent's force against them without causing harm. Hale stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him past Steven, completely off balance. His arms windmilled as he tried to stay upright, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like he might fall face first onto the mat. Steven's hand shot out, grasping Hale's elbow firmly but gently, preventing the fall. The children gasped. A few clapped instinctively. Hale stood there, breathing hard, held upright by the very man he'd been mocking moments before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Steven steadied him, then released his arm and stepped back. Steven said, addressing the entire room now, "Is the difference between force and technique, between strength and control." He looked directly at Hale. "You're strong, I'm not denying that. But strength without control is just noise, it's wasted energy." Hale's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, embarrassment, anger, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like respect, though he was fighting hard to suppress it. "You want to teach your son something valuable?" Steven continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "Teach him that real power comes from discipline, from humility, from knowing that you don't have to prove anything to anyone." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since walking into the dojo, Richard Hale had nothing to say. His son, still standing near the doorway, watched the entire exchange with tears welling in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but something deeper. Perhaps the first glimpse of a lesson his father had never been able to teach him. Steven turned away from Hale, clearly considering the matter closed. He began to walk back toward the side of the mat where the children sat. But then something unexpected happened. Hale's son took 3 quick steps forward, his voice breaking through the silence. "Mr. Seagull." The teenager called out, his voice uncertain but determined. Steven stopped and turned, his expression softening immediately. Can you teach me that move?" the boy asked. "The one where you redirected him." The question echoed through the dojo like a bell. Everyone's attention shifted between the boy and his father. Hale stood frozen, his face unreadable, watching his son step further onto the mat. Steven studied the teenager for a long moment. The boy had his father's build but none of his arrogance. His eyes held genuine curiosity and, beneath that, a quiet desperation to learn something his expensive private schools had never taught him. Steven glanced at Richard Hale, a silent question in his gaze. Hale's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his son, then at Steven, then back at his son. Whatever he'd planned to say died in his throat. Instead, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Steven smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd shown since this whole situation began. "Of course," he said to the boy. "What's your name?" "Jacob," the teenager answered, stepping onto the mat with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "All right, Jacob. And the rest of you?" Steven gestured to all the children in the room. "Come join us. Everyone's going to learn this together." The kids erupted from their spots along the walls, rushing to form a circle around Steven. Their earlier discomfort had transformed into eager energy. Steven began demonstrating the basic principles of balance and redirection, his movements slow and deliberate so everyone could follow. Jacob stood at the front, absorbing every word, every gesture. Richard Hale remained standing in the corner, watching silently as his son learned from the man he tried to humiliate. Parents pulled out their phones, but this time not to capture a confrontation. They were recording a genuine moment of teaching, of transformation. And then something happened that would change everything. The lesson continued for another 10 minutes, with Steven patiently guiding each child through the fundamental principles of Aikido. Jacob, Richard Hale's son, proved to be a quick learner, his movements becoming more fluid with each repetition. The other children followed along, their faces bright with concentration and joy. Steven moved among them like a gentle shepherd, correcting stances with a light touch, offering encouragement with a nod or a quiet word. This was what he'd come here for. Not confrontation, not drama, but simply to share what he knew with young people who needed positive guidance. The parents watched from the sidelines, some wiping away tears at the beauty of the moment. What had started as an ugly confrontation had transformed into something profoundly moving. Then Marcus Chen, the dojo owner, appeared at Steven's elbow. His face was tight with concern, the earlier relief replaced by a new worry. "Steven," Marcus said quietly, pulling him aside while the children continued practicing. "We need to talk." Now, Steven excused himself and followed Marcus to the corner of the dojo, away from the crowd. "What is it?" Steven asked, reading the stress in his friend's expression. Marcus glanced over at Richard Hale, who still stood apart from everyone, watching his son with an unreadable expression. "That man," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Richard Hale. He's not just some random businessman showing up today." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's our biggest donor. He's contributed over $50,000 to this youth program in the past year alone." Steven's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "And?" he prompted. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. 10 minutes ago, he pulled me aside and told me that if he's publicly embarrassed any further, he's pulling all his funding. Not just future donations, he threatened to demand back what he's already given, claiming breach of respect or some legal nonsense his lawyers will figure out. The weight of those words settled between them. "These kids," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the children still practicing on the mat. "Half of them can only afford to be here because of his money. Their families, they can't pay full price. If he pulls that funding, we'll have to turn away at least 15 students. Maybe shut down the whole program." Steven looked past Marcus at the children, at Jacob, finally smiling as he successfully executed a basic redirection technique. At the young boy he'd helped earlier, now practicing with fierce determination. At all of them, lost in the pure joy of learning. Then his gaze shifted to Richard Hale, standing alone in his corner, isolated by his own pride and anger. For a long moment, Steven said nothing. Marcus waited, anxiety radiating from him like heat. Then Steven did something that surprised everyone who was watching. He walked directly toward Richard Hale. The room seemed to sense the shift in energy. Conversations quieted. Parents turned to watch. Even the children slowed their movements, distracted by what was unfolding. Steven stopped a few feet from Hale, his posture open and non-threatening. Then he extended his hand. Hale stared at it like it was a foreign object, his face a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "No," Hale said, his voice cold. He crossed his arms over his chest. "You don't get to humiliate me, and then pretend everything's fine with a handshake. Steven didn't lower his hand. He kept it extended, patient and steady. "I didn't humiliate you," Steven said calmly. "You did that to yourself. But that's not what this is about anymore." "Oh, really?" Hale's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Then what is it about?" Steven took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire dojo, clear and unwavering. "I don't care how much money you have," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't care about your donations or your threats or your lawyers. You don't get to disrespect people, especially children, and call it power. Money doesn't give you that right. Success doesn't give you that right. Nothing gives you that right." The parents erupted in quiet applause, some nodding vigorously in agreement. Jacob looked at his father with an expression that mixed shame and hope, silently pleading for him to do the right thing. Marcus stood frozen, probably calculating how quickly the program would collapse. But then something unexpected happened. Richard Hale's carefully constructed facade began to crack. His jaw trembled. His eyes, which had been so hard and defiant moments before, suddenly glistened with something that looked like pain. "You don't know," Hale said, his voice shaking in a way that shocked everyone in the room. "You don't know what it's like to have everyone expect everything from you. To never be allowed to fail. To have to be perfect, strong, successful every single moment of every single day." The vulnerability in his voice was startling. Steven lowered his extended hand and took a step closer. "Then sit with me," Steven said quietly. "Right here, right now, and let's talk about it." He gestured to a spot on the mat, away from the crowd. Hale looked at his son, at the parents watching, at Marcus, at Steven. Then, to everyone's absolute astonishment, Richard Hale sat down. Steven sat across from him, and for several minutes, the two men talked in voices too low for anyone else to hear. "Do you think people who act arrogant are sometimes just hiding their own pain? Share your thoughts in the comments below." The dojo had never been so quiet. Parents stood frozen in place, some straining to hear the conversation happening on the mat. Children sat cross-legged in small clusters, watching the two men with wide, curious eyes. Even Marcus Chen, usually so composed, found himself holding his breath. Steven and Richard Hale sat facing each other, close enough that their conversation remained private, yet visible enough that everyone could witness the transformation unfolding. Steven spoke first, his voice low and measured. Though no one else could hear the exact words, his body language conveyed openness, patience, and genuine interest. He leaned forward slightly, listening intently as Hale began to speak. Richard Hale's shoulders, which had been rigid with defensive pride just minutes earlier, began to sag. His hands, previously clenched into fists, opened and rested on his knees. As he talked, his head bowed lower and lower, until he was staring at the mat between them. Steven nodded occasionally, sometimes asking a question, sometimes just letting the silence hold space for Hale's words. Then Steven began to share his own story. Those close enough could catch fragments. Thought fame would fill that emptiness. Made so many mistakes. Ego nearly destroyed everything I cared about. Hale looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. He'd expected judgment, perhaps even a lecture. Instead, he was receiving something he hadn't experienced in years: honest, vulnerable human connection. Steven continued, his hands gesturing as he spoke about his own journey. The mistakes he'd made, the people he'd hurt, the long, difficult road to understanding that true strength had nothing to do with proving himself to others. "I spent years," Steven said, his voice just loud enough now that some could hear, trying to be what everyone expected. The action hero. The tough guy. The man who never showed weakness. He paused, his gaze steady on Hale. "And you know what all that got me? Loneliness. Distance from the people who mattered. A reputation built on an image instead of on truth." Hale's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "My son," Hale said, his voice breaking, "looks at me like I'm a stranger. Like he's afraid of me." He glanced over at Jacob, who sat with the other children, watching his father with an expression of cautious hope. "I don't know when that happened. I don't know when I became the kind of man my own kid is scared to disappoint." Steven followed his gaze to Jacob, then looked back at Hale. "It's not too late," Steven said simply. "That boy right there, he doesn't want your money. He doesn't want your success. He wants you. The real you, not the armor you wear to face the world." Hale's composure finally shattered. A single tear rolled down his cheek, then another. He didn't wipe them away. "I don't know how to be that person anymore," Hale admitted, his voice raw. I don't even know if that person still exists. He does, Steven assured him. I can see him right now. That's who I've been talking to for the past 10 minutes. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Then Steven stood, extending his hand once more, not as a challenge this time, but as an offer of genuine partnership. Hale looked at the hand, then up at Steven's face. He saw no judgment there, no superiority, no mockery. Just respect, just understanding. Slowly, Richard Hale reached up and took Steven's hand. Steven pulled him to his feet, and the two men stood facing each other. Then Hale did something that shocked everyone in the room, even more than sitting down had. He turned toward the assembled parents and children, his voice clear despite the emotion still evident in his eyes. I owe everyone here an apology, Hale said. Especially you. He looked at Steven, then turned to Marcus. And you. Finally, his gaze settled on the children sitting on the mat. And all of you. I came in here acting like my money and my success gave me the right to treat people however I wanted. That was wrong. Completely wrong. The room remained silent, everyone processing this unexpected turn. Hale's voice grew stronger. I thought strength meant never backing down, never admitting you're wrong. But I see now that real strength, real courage, is being able to admit when you've failed, when you've hurt people, when you need to change. He turned to face his son directly. Jacob, Hale said, his voice cracking again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for being the kind of father who made you ashamed instead of proud, for caring more about my image than your happiness. Jacob stood up slowly, tears streaming down his face. I want to do better. Hale continued. I want to be better, not just for you, but for me too. Father and son stood 10 feet apart, the distance between them representing years of emotional disconnect. Then Jacob crossed that distance in 3 quick steps and threw his arms around his father. Richard Hale embraced his son, truly embraced him, and the dam finally broke completely. Both of them wept openly, holding each other in the middle of the dojo. The room erupted in applause, not performative or polite, but genuine, heartfelt recognition of a real moment of transformation. Steven stepped back quietly, letting the father and son have their moment. What nobody in the dojo realized at that moment was that everything had been captured on camera. Jennifer Walsh, a local news reporter who'd been assigned to cover the charity event as a simple feel-good community story, had arrived just as the confrontation began. Her cameraman had recorded the entire sequence, from Hale's initial insults to Steven's unmovable stance, from the unexpected lesson to the powerful conversation, and finally to the emotional reconciliation between father and son. She'd planned to turn off the camera several times, feeling like she was intruding on something too personal for broadcast. But something told her this was bigger than just local news. This was a story people needed to see. By that evening, Jennifer had posted a carefully edited segment on her station's social media accounts with the caption, "Action star Steven Seagal teaches a bully a lesson in humility without throwing a single punch." Within 2 hours, the video had been shared over 10,000 times. By midnight, it had gone viral. The next morning, Richard Hale woke up to find his phone flooded with notifications. His email inbox was overflowing. His social media accounts, which he rarely checked, showed hundreds of messages, tags, and comments. The footage had spread across every major platform. Entertainment news sites picked it up. Sports channels ran segments on it. Even international media outlets were covering the story. The headlines varied but carried the same theme. Steven Seagal's masterclass in restraint goes viral. Businessman gets humbled by action star. Then something beautiful happens. The most powerful martial arts lesson ever caught on camera. Millions of people watched as Hale tried unsuccessfully to move Steven. They watched Steven teach the children. They watched the private conversation transform a broken man. They watched father and son embrace. The comments section became a phenomenon of its own. This is what real masculinity looks like. Strength with compassion. I've watched this 5 times and I cry every single time they hug. Steven Seagal just earned my respect in a way none of his movies ever did. That father's apology to his son. I felt that. My dad never said those words to me. But the response that mattered most came from Richard Hale himself. 3 days after the incident, he posted a public statement on his company's official accounts. Last Saturday, I was captured on video being the worst version of myself. I disrespected a man who deserved honor, embarrassed my son, and demonstrated everything that's wrong with how we sometimes equate success with the right to be cruel. Steven Seagal showed me something that day that I'll never forget. That true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you're wrong, and to change. I'm grateful that moment was recorded, as humiliating as it was to watch myself. I needed to see what I'd become. To the community, to Marcus Chen and his incredible youth program, and especially to my son Jacob, I'm sorry. And I'm committed to doing better. As a first step, I'm not just maintaining my financial support of the dojo's youth program, I'm doubling it. Additionally, I'm establishing a scholarship fund for at-risk youth who want to study martial arts, but whose families can't afford it. This isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about putting my money where it should have been all along, supporting the real work of building character and strength in our young people. Thank you, Stephen, for the lesson. Thank you, Jacob, for your patience. And thank you to everyone who's reached out with both criticism and encouragement. I'm listening. The post was shared over 100,000 times within 24 hours. But the real changes happened away from the cameras. Jacob enrolled in Marcus Chen's dojo and began training seriously 3 times a week. Richard Hale often came to watch, sitting quietly in the back, no longer demanding attention or special treatment. The dojo received hundreds of new enrollment requests from families across the state who'd seen the video and wanted their children to learn from the same program that had created such a powerful moment. Marcus had to hire 2 additional instructors to handle the increased demand. Steven Seagal, true to his nature, declined all interview requests about the incident. When pressed by reporters, he released a simple statement through his representatives. Respect isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about lifting others up, even when they try to bring you down. I'm glad something positive came from that day. But the real credit belongs to a father who had the courage to change and a son who had the grace to forgive. He never did another public appearance about the incident, preferring to let his actions speak louder than his words. The video continued to circulate for months, shared in parenting groups, shown in leadership seminars, used in conflict resolution training. It became more than just a viral moment, it became a teaching tool. 6 months later, Richard Hale and his son Jacob were spotted together at the dojo, both wearing G uniforms, both training side by side. The photos that emerged from that day showed something the original viral video had only hinted at: genuine smiles on both their faces, the comfortable closeness of a relationship being rebuilt, and the unmistakable bond between a father and son finding their way back to each other. Let us know which part of this story impacted you the most. We read every comment, and your feedback helps us bring you even better stories. More incredible true stories are coming your way soon. Thank you for watching. If you believe in respect, second chances, and the power of real change, type respect in the comments below.